Your sourdough journey starts here. Today, I'm gonna talk to you about all the ins and outs of how to begin your sourdough process. We're gonna start making our sourdough starter. I'm gonna talk about what this is, how easy it can be to make sourdough, and if I do my job right today, you're gonna wanna start making sourdough right away. So before I begin showing you how to actually make your starter, I wanna talk a little bit about what sourdough is, the benefits of it, and why you should start thinking about consuming it. But if you don't wanna listen to that, you can just skip to the part where I talk about the tools you'll need and actually how to create your sourdough starter. So what actually is sourdough? If you've been on social media and you've seen people posting about them making homemade bread and sourdough, you might think that this is just a current trend or fad in today's world. But in all actuality, whenever you've heard about bread in ancient history, within the past few hundred years or few thousand years, this is how bread has always been made. If you've heard about bread in the Bible, this is the bread that they are talking about. But all the bread in today's grocery stores aren't really bread. I even hesitate to call them bread. White bread, even the whole wheat bread, even the sourdough bread in the grocery store, as I'm about to talk about, these aren't true breads. They last forever on the shelves. They're full of preservatives and other artificial ingredients, a long list of ingredients, and these just really aren't bread. But why would you want to consume sourdough in the first place? Why would you want to go through this entire process? Because this is a way that you can actually enjoy bread again and receive health benefits from it and not experience autoimmunity or digestive issues or sudden insulin spikes or skin issues or digestive issues when you consume grains. This is a way that you can consume bread again and feel good. Ancient cultures, humans have known for a long time. Since we started the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago, humans knew then that you couldn't just go up and start consuming grains without properly preparing them first, whether that is soaking or sprouting or fermenting, because this helps to reduce the defense chemicals in those grains. Now, all plants, whether that is leaves, stems, roots, nuts, and seeds, these all contain any varying degrees of defense chemicals. One of the most popular defense chemicals is gluten. This is a lectin that has been shown in the data to cause a level of autoimmunity. It causes leaky gut, it can cause skin issues, and in severe cases with individuals who are celiac, can cause even death. But when you learn how to make truly long fermented sourdough like we're gonna do today, the fermentation of these grains removes a lot of that gluten among other anti-nutrients. And this is what humans have been doing for thousands of years. We've just forgotten it or kind of pushed it to the side in our Western culture. And now we are growing up in a culture where we have forgotten these ancient plant preparation methods. Fermentation, soaking, and sprouting are what humans have always done to properly prepare their plants and their grains. But for the sake of just hitting their bottom line, it's more cost effective to not long ferment your sourdough. It's more cost effective to not sprout your rice. It's more cost effective to just use refined grains and put a long list of ingredients in there. Our digestive tracts aren't designed to break down and ferment grains like other species might. Just for example, ruminant animals like cows and bison, they have 4 stomachs. That's why they're called a ruminant animal, because one of their stomachs is called a rumen. And this stomach is literally designed to ferment the grasses that they eat. They regurgitate that and then re-swallow it into a different stomach so that way they can break that down properly. Human digestive tracts, on the other hand, we have one long esophagus into very acidic stomachs. Then we have a long small intestine and a short colon. This digestive tract is really good for breaking down animal proteins. We don't have the type of digestive tract that is designed to ferment the grains internally. What humans have done throughout a very long time is we've evolved to ferment our foods externally. Remember that. When people talk about grains being healthy, there's context. In today's modern world, the way we consume grains is completely different than how we've always consumed grains. The way humans have consumed grains throughout all of history, it's always been fermented, soaked, or sprouted, or prepared another traditional way, so that way these defense chemicals can be limited and we can actually digest and absorb the nutrients found in those grains. Today, we just often consume grains every day without them going through the proper preparation methods. So if you're new to your sourdough journey and you love consuming grains like I do, this can really be that thing that helps you to be able to enjoy grains in a healthful way. But you might be thinking, Craig, what about sourdough from the grocery store? Is that good? Tell me about that. Well, if you look on the back of a sourdough label and you see any type of ingredients that say acid in it, lactic acid or citric acid or some other form of acid. That is an ingredient that companies use to bypass the fermentation process. You might as well just be consuming white bread, Wonder Bread at that point, because that's the same thing nutritionally. Truly long fermented sourdough should only have 3 ingredients: water, flour, and salt. And of course, bacteria and yeast, but that's gonna come when we ferment this. Bacteria and yeast are gonna be created from this living culture that we're about to create. So you're new to your sourdough journey and you wanna begin making your sourdough. Well, it starts here by creating your sourdough starter. This starter is where all sourdough begins. And we've had our starter for a few years at this point. Some people have had their starter passed down generations. It's a living organism that, as long as you feed it right with water and flour, that bacteria continue to feed off itself. This is very good bacteria that's gonna populate your gut microbiome, that's gonna help to reduce all the defense chemicals in grains, like the gluten and other lectins and anti-nutrients found in grains. But this starter is where it all begins. And so here are the tools that you're gonna need when you begin making your sourdough starter. So take notes. The first thing you're gonna need are 2 glass mason jars. Make sure they're glass. A rubber band can also come in handy. We can use this in a little bit. You're gonna place this around your mason jar just to see how much your starter has grown over time. You're also gonna need a kitchen scale. This is my coffee scale, but just a simple kitchen scale will do. You're gonna need a nice wooden stir to mix up your flour and water, and then filtered water. Make sure that your water is actually filtered, because if you're just using tap water, the chlorine in there can actually kill the bacteria. So make sure it's nice filtered water. I'm using reverse osmosis water with no minerals added in it. You're also gonna need an organic, unbleached, all-purpose or bread flour. Just make sure that it's organic and unbleached. I've wanted to start playing around with einkorn, which is an ancient grain. This is a little bit more ancestrally consistent, but this is a lot easier entry level to begin with. But if you're become more experienced, then you can definitely play around with an ancient grain like einkorn. And the last thing you're gonna need, this is super, super important, and this is probably the easiest way to make your sourdough starter. You're gonna need a dehydrated sourdough starter culture. Now, I have 2 different examples here of ones that you can order online. What we've used in the past, this is from Ballerina Farm. This is called Willa. We've had her for 2, maybe 3 years at this point going on. And this is just simply a starter that we're gonna make today that's just been dehydrated into flakes. So these are all the tools that you're gonna need. Now I'm gonna show you actually how to make your sourdough starter. This is gonna take about 5 days for it to become fully alive and active. Then you can start baking with it. So it just requires a little bit every day, maybe just 2 to 5 minutes every single day. And once you get the hang of it, it's really a seamless and pretty simple process. It might seem overwhelming, but this is such a simple process. And if you're not feeding your sourdough starter every day, you can just stick it in the fridge and it stays alive a lot longer. So if you're traveling, you might be thinking, can I still do this if I travel a lot? Absolutely, we do all the time. We just stick it in our fridge and it stays alive. So to start your sourdough starter, this is morning 1, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna have your mason jar, turn on your scale, and you're gonna place it on your scale, but you're gonna tear it so it's at 0. And the very first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna add 5 grams of this sourdough starter culture here to your mason jar. You're gonna pour in 5 grams, then you're gonna tear your scale again, and then you're gonna add 25 grams of water. Then you're gonna let this sit there for just maybe a minute or so to allow the starter to actually absorb most of that water. You're gonna tear your scale again, and now we're gonna add 20 grams of flour to the scale. So we're doing a little less flour. We're doing 20 grams flour compared to 25 grams of water this first time, because a little bit of extra water will allow that to really ferment overnight for the first time. But for the rest of our feedings, we're gonna use equal parts water and equal parts flour. Then you're just gonna take your wooden stir and just make sure this is all mixed evenly. That way there's no dry flour left, and you're just mixing that up. And really what you should see is just a toothpaste-like consistency. And there you have your sourdough starter. So really then all you're gonna do is, once you have all those ingredients combined, you're just gonna place a lid on it and you're gonna sit this at room temperature. I prefer to store mine in my pantry, nice and dark in there. It stays maybe around 70 degrees, like our house temperature. Just gonna place that in there for 24 hours. And then on day 2, you're gonna come back and we're gonna feed it again. So it's been 24 hours. I have my sourdough starter and looks the same. It hasn't grown, there's no bubbles, it hasn't risen at all. It's gonna take a couple more days for the magic to happen. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna place a new clean jar on your scale, tear that. You're gonna take 10 grams out. Okay, 10 grams, and you're just gonna add this to your new clean mason jar. It really doesn't take much. You'll notice you'll have discard when you go to feed your starter, and your discard, when it's alive and active, this can make really, really good pancakes or waffles or other recipes like that. And so you're just going to make sure that all of your starter on morning 2 is just pushed down at the bottom, so that way when we add the water and flour, this can all be nicely submerged and mixed together. And then we're just gonna add equal parts water and equal parts flour. So we're gonna do 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water. And then you're just gonna mix this all up, and it should be about the same consistency, and you'll have a little bit more in there this time. But at this point, after morning 2, after it's been 24 hours of making your starter, it's not gonna be alive just yet. And you can place your rubber band on it now, but I don't expect this to grow very much at all. But when it comes to days 4 and days 5, that's when you'll wanna place a rubber band around this just to see if it's grown at all. And you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna place a lid on it, and that's what your sourdough starter should look like. We added the starter, the fresh flour, and the fresh water, just 3 ingredients with the bacteria and all the good yeast in there. Just gonna do the same thing. Place this at room temperature for another 24 hours, and we're gonna check back in on it on morning 3. So now it's morning 3, you're gonna do the same exact thing as you did for morning 2, and when it's morning 4, you're gonna do the same exact thing. Take 10 grams out, and then just add 25 grams flour and 25 grams water. And if you want, at this point on morning 3 or morning 4, you can add a rubber band right at the top of where your starter currently is, and when you check back in on it, if it's come up and risen above that, then you know it's starting to grow and it's starting to come alive. On the evening of day 4, when you check your sourdough starter, you can see, you'll probably notice that there's some bubbles. It's risen slightly because all that bacteria and yeast are feeding off of the sugar and the carbohydrates in that flour. So what you're gonna see, hopefully, if you're doing this right, you should see some bubbles and it's risen. At this point on day 5, if it looks like this, that's when you know your starter is alive, and congratulations, you can start baking with it. So when it comes to actually using your starter for baking, we're gonna do additional videos talking about that and how to bake a sourdough loaf using your starter and the whole process behind that. But for daily feedings, you're gonna wanna feed this every day unless you stick this in the fridge, upon which then you can, let that sit for a week or a couple weeks at a time and then take it out and then feed it regularly. But if you're gonna be using your sourdough starter regularly and you're gonna be baking with it on a daily or even other day or weekly basis, you're gonna wanna keep this out on the counter. This is our starter that we've had for almost a few years at this point. And so what we do is when we feed this daily, we will sit this on our kitchen scale, and we know the weight of our weck jar. This is a standard weck jar. We sit this on the scale, and we will take this out of here until this gets down to about 500 grams on the scale. And we're just gonna add 100 grams water and 100 grams flour. If this is a little confusing, we're gonna add this to our website and in the description below, so you have all the ratios for you there. But you can really start to see some of these bubbles forming in this starter. That's when you know it's nice and alive. If you feed this right and you keep this alive, this is something that you can pass down generation to generation. I have some friends that have had their sourdough starter going for a couple decades. Ours is pretty new at 3 years old, or just about 3 years old, but this is something that you can pass down to your kids and really keep it going. And for more incredible content on how to live a healthy ancestral lifestyle, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Ancestral Supplements. I'll talk to you next time.